My name is Van Martin Rowe. I was born in Pasadena, California in 1948. I know that sounds really ancient, and it is, because whenever I sign up for something and you have to go choose your birth date, I have to scroll back. As a kid, I knew I wasn't like everybody else. My interests were different. I was always the last person chosen for sports teams. And usually it was because the coach said, okay, you get Rowe. And everybody would moan and go, oh, because they knew I was no good. So that was kind of hard growing up because as a child, sports and things like that were very important. And it's also the way you socialize as a child. I went to Catholic school with the nuns, and they had a carnival. And one of the things was who could do the hula hoop the longest. And I won. And I was so excited that I won something. But what I won, I didn't know in advance, was a football. So it's like, what the hell am I going to do with a football? And growing up, I was an altar boy. I was in sanctuary choir. I played the organ at the church. I was really a Catholic. That was just who I was. Then I had to kind of pull back on it because I had been taught I was going to hell. That was a difficult thing for me to do, to kind of resolve who I was as a person and who the Catholic Church saw me as. And of course, that also filtered down to my mother and my grandmother. When I was maybe 12 or 13, there was something on the TV called Dr. Kildare. And the star of the show was Richard Chamberlain. And I remember there was one episode, there was a surfer that had epilepsy. So that meant that Dr. Kildare had to all of a sudden get into a bathing suit. And boy, when I saw him in that bathing suit, it was like, whoa, baby. Of course, I didn't say that because I was only 12, but I knew I was attracted to him. And I also knew that I wasn't supposed to be. I didn't actually know why. All I knew was, as a man, I couldn't be attracted to another man. I also started sewing. And that was another thing that my parents were extremely ashamed of. In fact, my mother, who had a sewing machine, refused to teach me how to use it. So I had to get out the instruction manual and teach myself how to use it because she just didn't think that was acceptable for a boy to sew. I remember when I would go to the fabric store, I would always go with my sisters, and my sisters would pay for it, the fabric or whatever, because I was embarrassed to be buying it myself. It was almost like I was buying pornography or something, that I shouldn't have this interest in fashion and clothes and sewing and making things. It just wasn't acceptable. I went to college in Maryland, and all of my relatives thought that I had gone to the seminary because I was that religious that they expected I was going to become a priest. It wasn't something that they were surprised at, but it exposed me to a lot of things. And one thing it did is I went into Washington, D.C. on the weekend, and I stayed at the YMCA. Well, there I met someone, and I was extremely drawn to him and attracted to him, and we became friends. And then eventually that turned into a physical relationship. I dated girls. I tried to fit in. I was dating a girl who was from Long Island, and so I was able to stay with her family on Long Island. And through that, I got a job. And since I wasn't of age, I couldn't sign a lease. So I had to live in a hotel. I did everything to be able to afford this room, basically. And I would walk all the way to my job, which was on 57th Street. So that was like 34 blocks that I would walk to save money on the subway. And I remember I'd have to eat all my meals out because there was no kitchen, there was no hot plate, there was no refrigerator in my room. So I used to go and I would order an iced tea with extra lemons. And I basically would drink the iced tea and eat the lemons. And that was my dinner. And after a while, I got sick because I wasn't taking care of my body. I mean, it was terrible. So I had to leave New York and I went back to Pasadena. I wasn't ashamed of it, but I wasn't proud of it either, that I had kind of not made it in New York. The good thing is in New York, I was exposed to other young people that were in the fashion business and that were going to fashion school. And they were just like me. And I had never met anybody like me. So all of a sudden I thought, well, I can do that. If they're going to be a fashion designer, why can't I be a fashion designer? So I got to know people in the fashion business. I also got to know more gay people, although I still was not sexually active. I had not been since I met that person in Washington, D.C. that I had I guess you could call an affair with. He was the naval attaché for the Chilean embassy. And he was a lieutenant commander in the Navy. So he was very handsome and sexy and, lovely person, educated. And he wasn't really out in the gay community because of his job. He had to be deeply closeted too. So we kind of got along that way. We both were trying to keep it, under the radar, so to speak. So when I came back to Pasadena and I went to design school, and then, I found out that there was a gay beach. That sort of gave me a little bit more courage to just be around gay people because I had never been around gay people. And eventually, somebody with beautiful blue eyes, his name was Cecil Harper, caught my eye. I was 23 at the time. He was 40. I guess that's 17 years. Anyway, so it's quite a bit of a difference. But we became very close, and I fell in love, and he fell in love. I never told anybody that he was my boyfriend because I was embarrassed and ashamed. And as he was, he wouldn't have felt comfortable with that either. I had always wanted to start living together and starting a life as a couple, but he was very resistant to it because he was closeted. And I was young and didn't quite know how to make it happen. So we ended up breaking up. And that was a very hard thing for both of us. And I was at that time the head designer for this big company named Janssen. So I decided if I was going to be a designer and have my own designer line, I was going to have to do it myself. And I'd have to do it pretty quick because I could see, I may not have much time. My sister died at 32. Who knows when I would go? So I started my own fashion line. It was very exciting. My name in my company was Van Martin for himself. Pretty soon I was selling Neiman Marcus. Saks Fifth Avenue gave me all their windows. Macy's gave me my own boutique. And that's kind of how I became a fashion designer. I gave up the company, closed it up. So that's when I started my interior design business. It was 40 years ago. And I've never looked back. It was a wonderful time, the 80s, but it was also a terrible time to be gay because that was the time of AIDS, when AIDS began infecting everything in our lives. I had my first relationship back in the 70s. And then my second really adult relationship was in the 80s when I actually lived with someone and fell in love with someone more my own age. And unfortunately, he passed away from AIDS. I had a very difficult time dealing with it. And so it was suggested by my mother that I go to group therapy. They suggested that I get a computer. It was a DOS-based system, so it was not user-friendly at all. You turned it on, and basically there was a green screen, and all that was a C with a colon after it that would flash at you. And that was it. Didn't say anything. And so I got that. And then they told me that there were gay bulletin boards. It was called a bulletin board system. And they were something you took your phone and you put it in a cradle and you dialed this number and it went, then your phone went, the next thing you know, you're on. So the one that I joined was called No Name. And I joined No Name, and it was a local Los Angeles-based bulletin board system. All it was local. What you would do is post things, and then people would reply to your posts. Then you would have to reply to their posts. So it wasn't like real-time chatting. It wasn't that at all. There were no pictures. There were no graphics, just words. So I posted about just basically what I was going through, and other people were going through similar things because it was very common to have people pass from AIDS. I got a reply, and it was a reply from another user who had lost their partner from leukemia. And so we had that in common. And we started chatting about, the sadness, the emptiness, what it's like to go through this without really being supported by your family or supported by society, supported by anybody, because it was a gay relationship. What are they? They're, roommates. So we wrote letters, and I'd say after about 2 months, we met. His name was Barry Storch. I had to constantly be thinking, don't call him Gary, don't call him Gary, don't call him Gary. And I was pretty good. A couple of times I did, but he was understanding. But I didn't want to have another relationship. At that point, all it represented was heartbreak, was heartache. Do I really want to expose myself to that again? Do I really want to fall in love with somebody else? No, absolutely not. But Barry was very persistent. Barry was not a dog person. He was a cat person. But whenever Barry went into the bathroom, Elvis would sit outside the bathroom door and wait for Barry to come out. And I could also see Barry opening his heart up to Elvis. This dog that didn't like anybody was all of a sudden falling in love with a man who really didn't care for dogs. So I had to pay attention. And that's what did it for me. And I fell in love. And now it's 32 years later, and we've gotten married, and we live a lovely life, full of friends, full of family, full of love, is something that we appreciate because we've gone through periods in our life where that didn't exist. It also made us both extremely conscious of gay rights. In fact, the first time Barry and I took a trip, we went to the March on Washington, and we were surrounded for the first time with hundreds of thousands of gay men, women, every kind that you can imagine, fighting for the same thing that we wanted, which was acceptance, which was equality. I didn't want anybody else to go through what I had to go through. I thought, if that can be my legacy, that I leave to the younger generation, that I somehow made a difference in how they can live their lives, how they can relate to their family, how they can relate to their husband or wife. What a bigger legacy can you have than to make that positive change? It's one reason why I wanted to do this video, is because I thought, I want to affect change. I want people to believe in themselves and see they can make a difference.